Olá, pessoal! Eu voltei para fazer o anúncio do grande vencedor aí do nosso Ensino Idiomas Online, que é a trilha formativa para professores de idiomas, né, que dão aulas online. A SBS só me deu ok se eu estou sendo vista e ouvida por todos, para a gente poder, enfim, revelar aí o nome do grande ganhador. Foi um homem, já posso adiantar que foi um homem, um professor. Rafael, me mande uma mensagem dizendo se estou vendo, se estou sendo ouvida e vista, por favor. Rafael, vou aguardar. Talvez ele esteja me mandando uma mensagem avisando. Mas eu não quero atrasar o evento, né? Só quero contar então que o Ensino Idiomas Online é uma trilha formativa organizada pelo Papo de Profs. Vocês me viram de manhã, né? Eu abri aqui o dia da SBS, eu sou a Daniele, sou professora de português como língua estrangeira, sim, eu estou ao vivo. E eu também tenho um centro formador de professores, né? Uma rede que conecta e capacita professores, que é o Papo de Profs. E a gente, nesse evento, além da nossa palestra, a gente contribuiu também com uma vaga no Ensino Idiomas Online, que é uma trilha formativa para professores que querem, de idiomas que querem dar aulas online, mas ainda tem muita dificuldade em pontos como planejamento, o domínio das ferramentas, né? E como, de fato, tornar a sua aula um ambiente cada vez mais participativo aí com seus alunos. Quais são as estratégias que você pode usar para isso e quais são as melhores ferramentas de acordo com os objetivos que os seus alunos têm. Então, a gente quer dizer, anunciar aí que o grande vencedor é o Giovanni Pires, com E, Giovanni Pires. O arroba dele no Instagram é THEGOFP, né? A SBS vai entrar em contato com você, tá bom, Giovanni, na segunda-feira, e aí a gente vai fazer os trâmites para te colocar lá na turma. A todos que se inscreveram, né, e participaram aí do sorteio, a gente quer agradecer e também deixar aqui, vou pedir então para o pessoal da SBS colocar o arroba Papo de Profs, né, que é o que está aqui no meu perfil. Vocês estão todos convidados a nos seguir no Instagram e lá a gente tem mais informações sobre os nossos cursos, ok? A página do nosso curso, ela é o papodeprofs.com.br/ensine online, para quem tiver interesse em saber mais sobre a nossa trilha formativa, ok? Para o pessoal da SBS, então, mais uma vez, é papodeprofs.com.br/ensineonline.html, se quiserem deixar aí para as pessoas que tiverem interesse em participar. Quero agradecer a participação de todos, tanto no sorteio como na minha própria fala pela manhã, e sigo aí super aberta para conversar com todos que queiram participar do curso, independentemente de sorteio, ok? É um curso que tem uma duração de 1 mês e está dividido em 7 módulos. É um curso online que você pode fazer no momento em que você tiver tempo aí no seu dia, que a nossa rotina é uma loucura, né? É isso, então. Eu quero passar a palavra de volta para a SBS, porque vocês têm uma palestra agora, né? Então, da National Geographic, né? Do pessoal da National. Então, boa palestra a todos e a gente se vê lá no perfil do Papo, então, arroba Papo de Profs. Obrigada, SBS.
Hello, welcome. It is my great pleasure to have the opportunity to be with you this morning. My name's Jair Félix, and I work for National Geographic Learning as a senior academic consultant for English language teaching in Latin America. I'm based in Mexico, and typically on a regular, let's say, time when we're not hit by the pandemic and the lockdown, I'm constantly traveling around Latin America, observing classes, analyzing curricula, talking to teachers, talking to school coordinators and program developers. And then I come back to my office in Mexico and I put projects for publications together. And so the idea is that through my observations, through my visits to schools and discussions with teachers, I help them to get materials and content that would leverage the content of National Geographic, but at the same time, it would empower them to, have success in the teaching and learning of English. And so today, what we're going to be talking about is how to incorporate the idea of STEAM topics into English language teaching. And what is it that we need to do in order to support the development of those STEAM topics and the practice of those STEAM topics into the English language teaching and learning that it's our main concern. I'm going to be illustrating a lot of the ideas and examples that I present today to you. I'm going to be illustrating those with content from National Geographic, because that's the organization that I work for. But bear in mind that the theoretical background and the ideas that I'm about to present to you all actually have application and implications, if you may, with all sorts of real world content that you could possibly bring into use for English language practice. So let's get down to business. And the first thing I'm going to ask you to do, and for this, I'm going to ask you to use your phones actually, or maybe your web browser, since I'm interested in knowing a bit about your background in order to shape the information that I'm about to present to you. I'm interested in knowing, where are you teaching or planning on teaching right now? Are you teaching very young learners? Are you teaching young learners? Are you teaching teenagers? Or are you teaching adults? And for this, I'm going to ask you to very, very simply scan the QR code that I have on the screen right now and go to Menti. You're going to automatically get access to Menti in order to answer my question. And if for any reason you cannot scan the code, you can use your web browser and go to www.menti.com and use this code in order to access my poll. Can I please ask you to join Menti by scanning this code in order to give me your information? I'll truly appreciate it. I'll give you a minute for you to go for you to get into Menti and try and answer my poll. Okay? Let's see if you can make it happen. And I'm going to be checking live your answers on Menti. Very good. Okay. Let's see. Thank you. If you're in, fantastic. I'm gonna access Menti in a minute to see your answers. Okay, let's see. Very good. Thanks for sharing. Great. And let's see how your answers are. Let's see if they're getting into Menti right away. Okay, let me open it up. Very nice. Okay, so we have a very interesting sharing here, because there's already 11 and 13 people, 113 people that have answered, and most of you are teaching teens and young adults. But there's also a very fair share of you who are teaching young learners and very young learners. Very good. Numbers keep coming. Very nice. Answers keep coming. And what I see here is that so far, 75 of you teach young adults and adults. 68 of you are teaching teenagers. Oh, but the young learners number is suddenly increasing. Now I have 52 people that are teaching young learners, and then 20 of you are teaching very young learners at the kindergarten age. Thanks for sharing your answer with me through Menti. So far, I've got 120 answers. Thank you all for that. And this helps me a lot understanding where you guys are coming from and what's your teaching background in order to shape my presentation right now. So thank you very much for this. So the main purpose of today's session is to try to create a link between STEAM and English language teaching. And for that, we're gonna be using those acronyms throughout the session today. We're gonna be talking about STEAM, which means content that comes from science, technology, engineering, art, and math. And we're going to find ways to combine this really powerful content with ELT, that stands for English language teaching. And there's a need on emphasizing the linking between those two fields, because traditionally, English language teaching has been considered a subject on its own and within the curricular ocean of an institution. In other words, typically when you are teaching English, you concentrate on, the grammar or the vocabulary or everyday topics like, going to the supermarket or giving addresses in English, or, the things that you need for your everyday situation. But now we are also demanding for, or the society, it's also demanding for a use of English that it's far more consolidated and far more professional than the traditional views of English language. In the past, people needed to learn English just because they wanted to, watch a movie in English without having to read subtitles. Or maybe they wanted to listen to their favorite band singing in English without having to, struggle with the translation of the lyrics of the song. Or maybe you needed English because you were planning for a shopping trip, to Orlando in the U.S. And that was about it. And so the needs for English practice only included, your everyday topics, or maybe learning vocabulary for specific everyday situations. But what's happening now with English as the true global language of science, of business, of culture, and intercommunication globally is demanding for, an upgrade on the topics that we deal with in English language teaching. So there's a demand for more language that deals with science, technology, engineering, art, and math as we teach the language further. It doesn't mean that we're gonna all of a sudden become science teachers or engineering teachers or math teachers. Not really. We are preserving the English language teaching concept, but we are enriching the practice of English language teaching with STEAM projects and content. And we got to understand that STEAM doesn't mean a movement away from language teaching. So the point of this talk, it's not to, invite you to stop teaching English and become a science teacher or a technology teacher. Not really. Because in reality, scientists, engineers, technologists, artists, and mathematicians, when you think about it, they all need language skills. They all need an appreciation and understanding of human communication, and they all need strong writing abilities. And on the other side of the coin, what the world is demanding for right now, it's for people not only to be able to say, hello, how are you, what's your name in English, but rather they want for people to be able to solve problems in English in many different fields and areas of endeavor. That is why we feel that STEAM and ELT fit nicely together. And they build upon and reinforce the combined skills and content of each, of STEAM and ELT, through cross-curricular transversal activities. Activities and projects that link the content of English instruction, the grammar, the vocabulary, the reading, the writing, the listening, and the speaking, with content, vocabulary, and activities that deals with science, engineering, technology, art, and math, right? So that is something that it's becoming more of an urgent need because of the world that we live in right now. because of the conditions of this world. And I came across a research not that long ago on how there's a demand for teaching for global competence in a rapidly changing world. This is a research that was carried out by the OECD. It was originally published a couple of years ago. This was before the coronavirus pandemic hit us. And even then, before all of this new situation that we're all in, the OECD was already talking about the need, or it was already talking about how globalization, the digital revolution, mass migration, and the prospect of climate instability were triggering new concerns and demanding a new kind of graduate, a new kind of student. And I would add to this conclusion of the OECD research, I would add it's not only globalization, it's not only the digital revolution, it's not only mass migration and climate instability, but now it's also the pandemic that are triggering new concerns and demanding a new kind of graduate. And this is also something that we all have to consider and take into account. For this, a lot of methodologies have been suggested. How can we, as language teachers, help our students develop those new skills that are necessary for successful practice in 21st century situations? How can we ensure that through our practice as language teachers, our students learn the language that will help them navigate in a world that it's globalized, that it's digital revolutionized, that deals with mass migration, climate instability, and pandemia nowadays? How can we actually help our students through our English lessons to ensure the development of those skills that are needed? Well, one possible answer is to help them develop 21st century skills alongside their language skills. So as we teach our students English, we gotta make sure that we add components, tasks, activities that help them think critically, that help them become creative thinkers, that force them to collaborate together, that aim for cross-cultural understanding, communication, computing, and career and learning self-reliance. So the idea then is that in our English language lesson, together with the grammar and the vocabulary and the reading and the writing embedded in such practice, we present our students with problem solving, with possibilities for research and analysis. We present them with projects in which they can create a new tangible outcome, design solution, tell stories of their own. And they get to that creativity effort by means of cooperation and compromising and reaching consensus and building community practices together. And such community practices are actually put together across diverse, maybe ethnical backgrounds or maybe knowledge levels or organizational cultures. So there's a need for values development in the making of those skills. They have to make sure that they learn English to craft and understand messages. And nowadays, again, because of the lockdown and the pandemic, a lot of such messages have to be created and delivered through media. So we also have to effectively show them how to use electronic information and knowledge tools. And again, because of the world that we live in and the current situation of our planet, we need to inspire our students to manage change, to understand that learning, it's not timetabled and linear, but that rather learning involves a lifelong process in which you can define and redefine objectives on regular basis. That is something that we all have to include. And that sounds like a lot of work. So maybe the question that's now popping into your head says, cool, But how can we do this? What would be a good way to make sure that through our English language practice, we're helping students cope with this reality and develop all of these skills? The answer, one possible answer to that question on how can we do it, is possibly incorporating STEAM into your English class. Make good use of content from science, technology, uh, art, math, etc., into your English class. How can you do it? Well, let me share with you just little tips and ideas on how you can incorporate STEAM into your English class. The first step would be, how about enriching the reading practice of your class? We teachers are always demanding for students to perform reading comprehension practices, right? We present them with text, and depending on the level and depending on the age we're teaching, the text can vary from being non-fictional if you're teaching young children to fictional if you're teaching young learners, to completely non-fictional and real life if you're teaching older students. At the end, we're always demanding for reading comprehension practice in your English class. How about we infuse that reading practice with informational reading? At the end, according to, the Common European Framework, the can-do statement from the Common European Framework, and also the CASAS standards in the US, students should read and comprehend complex literary and informational texts independently and proficiently. This is an ultimate goal of language competence. How can we make our students develop such ability for reading informational texts independently and proficiently? Maybe by enriching the content of those texts with STEAM practice. And I'll give you ideas on how to do this in a minute. But then that's one possible way for incorporating STEAM into your English class. Start working with the readings. Incorporate the reading practice of STEAM content into your class. So you move away from the traditional readings that come in textbook, and you enrich and infusion the reading practice with informational reading that come from the fields of science or technology or art or math, etc., right? That's one step. Another step would be helping students in their language practice to identify and evaluate arguments. At the end, again, both from the Common European Framework of Reference, taken straight from the can-do statements, and also from the CASAS standards in the US educational system, they're both agreeing that students should be able to delineate and evaluate the argument and specific claims in a text, including the validity of the reasoning as well as the relevance and sufficiency of the evidence. In other words, students have to, for this new 21st century needs of language, they have to go beyond the evident. They have to go beyond the traditional copy-paste activities and get into identifying, evaluating, analyzing arguments from the input that they're being presented to. Could be a reading, could be an audio, could be a video, could be a photo, but the idea is that they challenge it further by asking the right questions and going beyond the evident assumption. When you do this, when you help your students identify and evaluate arguments with STEAM content, the practice becomes much more meaningful, much more purposeful, and much more relevant, because you're using real world content that your students might be familiar with already, or that they can research further. So the activity is not over when they close the book, but actually that it's just the springboard into an ocean of possibilities for researching and learning further. So this idea of developing critical thinking by identifying and evaluating arguments gets strengthened and enriched by the incorporation of STEAM content into your English class. And then point number 3, the use of technology and the demand of standards all over the world when talking about English practice is students have to use technology, including the internet, but also, video, podcasts, whatever kind of technology they have available to produce and publish writing and to interact and collaborate through speaking practices with others. So there is a demand for English language teachers to incorporate technology into their practices. And that is more than evident nowadays that schools are in lockdown, that you have to teach your students online. There's an urgent need for students to start using technology. The problem is that if the content that you're presenting through technology is not, attractive enough, it's not challenging enough, it's not meaningful, nor purposeful, nor relevant to your students' lives, then the possibilities of them to engage in the use of technology for English learning purposes are very minimal. The incorporation of STEAM topics into the use of technology for teaching English enriches the possibilities, maximizes actually the possibilities for students to engage in the use of technology for developing projects further. And I'll give you examples of this in a minute. And then last but not least, we've talked about the need for maybe including STEAM on informational readings in your English class, the need for developing critical thinking, for identifying and evaluating arguments in your English class through STEAM content. We've talked about the need for using technology with STEAM content included in order to empower your students' practice of English through digital technologies. And last but not least is the idea of using PBL, or project-based learning, in which students learn by actively engaging in real-world and personally meaningful projects. And those projects, if they come from STEAM fields, chances are your students are going to find them more interesting, more challenging, and more easy to develop because they have an array of tools and a previously raised up interest into the topic. So the idea of using projects, or PBL as we call this approach, in the integration of STEAM and ELT is extremely powerful. At the end, enhancing your curriculum with some engaging STEAM activities and projects can benefit students in a variety of ways, from increasing critical thinking skills to giving them hands-on real-world learning experiences in and also out of your classroom. Combining STEAM with ELT can also appeal to a variety of learners, from, let's say, reluctant readers to those with literacy difficulties or disabilities who may be more eager to participate when they're able to learn English language concepts through science, technology, engineering, art, and math. And the more you embed STEAM into your curriculum, the more you'll find that the possibilities are endless. So there are very powerful benefits on using STEAM content in ELT practices, in English language teaching practices. Now, the question remains. We've talked about the benefits. We've talked about where in a lesson we should start incorporating those concepts of STEAM. Now, let's take a look at an ELT plus STEAM project, and let's see how they combine together. How can we empower the practice of English through content from science, technology, engineering, art, or math in your classroom? Okay, and as I mentioned before, we're gonna be using content from National Geographic because that's the source that I have available because of my job. But remember, you can change the source and keep the objectives, because the idea at the end is that you enrich and empower the practice of English through this real world content that I'm gonna be presenting. Okay, so let's say for a minute that you're teaching teenagers, for example, and or young adults, and the concept, the grammatical structure that you have presented previously as part of your English lesson is simple past. So you have an emphasis on that. Your class is all about simple past. You've practiced grammar already. Maybe you have asked your students questions like, what did you do yesterday? And they can answer, I went to a movie, for example. Excuse me. Or maybe you can ask them, when did you do your homework yesterday? And they can tell you, I did my homework in the afternoon. So this is a very grammatical practice. We're not incorporating STEAM yet. We're working on the language aspect of the practice, right? So we're simply practicing simple past structures. WH questions in simple past. Where did you go last Sunday? And they can tell you, I went to the park with my friend. Or, who did you eat lunch with yesterday? And they can tell you, I ate lunch with my sister. So you're practicing also irregular verbs in past. Did you watch TV last night? No, I didn't. I read a book. So you're practicing yes, no questions in simple past. And so you get the idea, right? What you're doing is you're practicing grammar in a very simple and traditional way. You are working on the language aspect of your class. But how about after your students have mastered the grammar, after you have you've made sure you've collected evidence that they have understood the grammatical aspect of your lesson, how if you present them with, vocabulary, new vocabulary in which you start incorporating STEAM concept? And for that, I'm gonna select a topic that it's a combination of science and engineering. I'm gonna be talking about archaeology. And since my unit is about the past tense, I'm gonna enrich my practice of the language of my unit with a STEAM field, if you may, that it's a combination again of science and engineering, and that has to do with archaeology. And for that, I'm gonna introduce my students to Nora Shockey. And I'm gonna tell them that Nora Shockey is a National Geographic archaeologist, right? And if they're not familiar with what archaeologists do, what's their field of expertise, I can have them maybe start thinking about them and about it, and they can tell me if archaeologists work outside in the field or inside in an office. Is it that they look for old things as part of their job? Do they study the things they find, or is their job only to gather ancient objects? What is it that they do? Or maybe it's all of the above. Very good. So I check on my students' attainment of the context that I'm gonna be introducing through the STEAM practice, and I maybe find the need for teaching them some new vocabulary to go along with the practice. So I'm going to teach them words like, for example, archaeologist, and I can contextualize the teaching of vocabulary by showing them the statements in which the word is in action. So I can simply tell them, Nora Shockey is an archaeologist. Or maybe I can teach them the word dig, the verb dig, which is what archaeologists do. And I can tell them that, for example, people dig holes to plant flowers. So I'm contextualizing. Again, I'm going back to the language stream of the notion by presenting vocabulary. Another key vocabulary word that I'm going to be using in my project, in my STEAM project, is the word site. So I can tell them that the scientists studied the site near the volcano. And notice how I'm using the previously taught grammatical structure. So I'm combining language with a more STEAM geared practice, right? Or I can tell them the word artifact and talk about how they can see many artifacts from around the world in museums. If I wanted to, I can keep on teaching all of the words that I feel are necessary for the incorporation of that STEAM project. And then, in order to make sure that they are understanding my drill, I can maybe set up a pair work, an activity in which I tell them, now work with a partner. I'll give you 60 seconds to write down the names of as many things from long ago you can see in museums. What are those artifacts that you can see at museums that come from archaeology findings? And I can say, ready? Are you ready? Go. And they can, getting pairs and come up with a list of words that I can later on use for the STEAM practice that's coming ahead. So all of this, it's simply for preparation of the practice. I've verified the grammar practice, I've introduced the context of archaeology, and I've dealt with some vocabulary teaching that I feel it's necessary for the best development of the practice. And so I can have this confirmation practice with my students in order to see if they can use some of the vocabulary that I previously presented. Or if I'm teaching older students, I can have them start thinking critically or go for factual information they might have inside of their heads. What do you know about archaeologists? What can you tell me? Or maybe for homework, I'm going to ask you to do a quick Google research and find examples or evidence of what archaeologists do in the field. Very simple. And again, just by asking this question, I'm incorporating the technology aspect into the practice. I'm going to ask my students to do a quick Google research on a computer, even in using their phones in class. I can ask them research about archaeologists and find facts about what is it they do as part of their everyday job. Just like that. Okay. And so another question would be, what do you know about artifacts, etc., etc.? So I can come up with as many questions as I needed in order to contextualize. And after that, I can have a quick revision if I needed to, if I detected that there's still, a need for confirmation of the understanding of vocabulary. And I can have my students tell me, okay, let's work on this, fill in the gap exercise. And they can tell me that an archaeologist is interested in history, or that an archaeologist chooses a site to study very carefully, that we dig holes in the ground, that an artifact is very, very old, and that ancient things are often broken. Just like that. So it's a quick review of the practice. Once I'm done with this vocabulary teaching, I can then jump into the actual STEAM project. And for that, I can contextualize my students by, telling them a quick story about Nora Choke and what she does as an archaeologist in Egypt. She specializes in Egyptian sites, and she looks for more evidence of Egyptian artwork and, evidence of the Egyptian culture in the field. So this is a photo of her with her crew, and they're digging holes at a site looking for artifacts. Notice how we're using the vocabulary we previously presented. If your students are, proficient enough or older enough to incorporate reading into the practice, then it's not only the image and the storytelling, but I can show them this reading, for example, in which they understand and contextualize the concept further. So they now understand what Nora specializes in and what she tries to get from the archaeological sites she explores. And she's looking to learn or to get evidence for lessons from history. And then this is a quick reading about how Howard Carter, a National Geographic explorer, found the tomb of King Tut in Egypt, right? So that is, again, just ways for enriching the STEAM project. Remember, we said that informational text was important, and this is exactly what I meant by that. So I can incorporate informational text in the practice. And then I can play a video in order to enhance the technology practice and to help them develop visual literacy further. Let's take a look at this little video that serves as a springboard into my STEAM project. Let's take a look.
Have you ever heard of the pharaohs, the ancient kings and queens of Egypt? Do you know about King Tut, the famous boy king? Tut became king of Egypt when he was only 9 years old. King Tut and Queen Cleopatra, the last queen of Egypt, lived more than 2,000 years ago. Do you ever wonder about people who lived long before us? I do. I wonder what their lives were like. Hi, I'm Nora Shawi. I'm a National Geographic explorer. I'm also an archaeologist. Archaeologists are scientists who explore places where people lived thousands of years ago. Some archaeologists study famous buildings like the Egyptian pyramids. Other archaeologists study famous people like Queen Cleopatra. Or they study mummies like the preserved body of King Tut. Instead of kings and queens, I'm interested in ordinary people, people like you and me, who lived in ancient times.
Okay, so I'm going to stop the video now in the interest of time, but you get the idea, right? So you understand that you present the, in this case, I'm presenting the archaeologist story and what she does in the field in a really simple yet very visible way. And after I introduce this yet extra concept to my students through the video, I can have some further language practice. I can have them answer questions, maybe categorize or put into the right order, or maybe they can develop language further by means of a true-false activity that shows comprehension of the language practice and the video. And after all of this, they're getting ready for the project itself. Remember, at the end, it's all about including PBL as part of the integration of STEAM and ELT. So let's say I'm teaching young kids, and I wanted to use this content with primary level kids. And I can maybe present them with a project in step-by-step processes in which I'm going to ask them to create a booklet of a great civilization. So they're going to become archaeologists themselves. So I can say, think of a civilization from long ago, write a title and heading on each page of the booklet so they can concentrate on looking for evidence about the food, how their homes were, what sort of clothes they wore, and the jobs they had. And notice how I'm using the key grammatical structure from the beginning, but I'm combining it with the STEAM concepts of archaeology that were presented before. And then I'm going to say research, because I need to incorporate technology and digital practice into my project. Research and write a sentence about the civilization's food, homes, clothes, and jobs. And then maybe they can find photos or draw pictures for each heading, or if they're older enough, they can maybe create a virtual presentation in which they insert video clips, perhaps, to even use further technology in the practice. And at the end, they, prepare the booklet, they write the information, and they present their ancient civilization booklet to the class. And if you wanted to add the input from the previously presented practice, they can ask questions, or you can ask them questions about, who Norishaki was, what did she discover about King Tut, what was the history of King Tut, and why is Egypt important in the project, and things like that. So in a very easy to handle, very simple project, you are demanding a lot of creativity, research, collaboration, and integration of technology into the practice of English with STEAM content. If you're teaching older students like young adults or teenagers, maybe you're not going to ask them to create a booklet like this, but perhaps you can present them with options. So these are options of projects for older students. You can invite them to, take action and do things if they want to learn more about history and archaeology. And I can give them options like, for example, they can research an important archaeological site virtually, and they can write a report about it and present their research to the class in English. They can do an interview to a famous archaeologist, and they role play that interview and present it in English to the class. Or they can simply do a presentation on a lesson from history that is important today, right? And that is more of a group effort, and you're working on collaborative efforts as well. So those are just examples of how to integrate STEAM and collaborate and ELT in a collaborative practice in the classroom, okay? At the end, the reason why I feel so passionate about this is that thousands, according to Geoff Morgan, thousands, possibly millions of students are really bored by schooling nowadays. School doesn't animate them anymore. And no matter the age, no matter the geographical location, the thing is that what students want to do is do things. They want to get their hands dirty. They want education to be for real. And for that, I think that the integration of STEAM projects with ELT is of great help. At the end, what you're doing with this integration of STEAM plus ELT is you're exposing your students to the creative process. You're offering meaningful collaboration. You're increasing their critical thinking. You're providing a unique way to problem solving, because the project in itself is a problem and they have to devise solutions to that problem. And you're giving all of your students a hands-on, unique learning experience. And again, that I think it's the reason why this integration of STEAM and ELT is so powerful and ultimately so important for the world we live in. Right? So thank you very much for your attention and your participation. All of the content that I've used in this presentation, again, comes from National Geographic sources, from a series that we call Explorations. But again, you can use it with whatever the source of content you prefer. The idea is integrating STEAM content with ELT to ensure success in the English language learning process in the 21st century. Thank you very much for your participation. And I don't know if we still have time for some questions or not, but even if we didn't, here's my email address and my contact information so we can stay in touch and discuss these topics further. Thank you very much again. And if it's a question or a comment, I'm all ears now. Back to you, SBS.
Hi, Jair. How
Hey.
are you?
I'm fine, thank
We're
you.
having a lot. Yeah, we're having some questions for you here on the chat. Okay.
Okay.
The first question I have here is from Elberg Hatger. I hope I spoke your name right. It's how to introduce STEAM on an online class since we're migrating from a physical classroom to a digital one. And he thanked you for that.
Very, very clever question. And I think it's even simpler to do it through digital resources, similar to what I did in my project presentation before. You can have your students learn, for example, the vocabulary by means of using PowerPoints like I did. All of that I showed you before was actually encrusted in a PowerPoint. I can gather all that amazing array of visuals, images, photos, videos from free of charge sources. My favorite one, of course, that it's completely free of charge is nationalgeographic.com. You go to that website, it's simple, it's nationalgeographic.com. You don't need any sort of usernames or passwords, and you can download a lot of information for teaching the vocabulary, using videos, and from there, you devise your project digitally. But again, I think following the model that I just presented to you, in which you use PowerPoint and video to incorporate STEAM into the practice, works wonders when teaching online. Okay?
Oh, that was awesome, Jair. I'm trying to find the name of the person here, but I think I lost her comment. But she was asking if STEAM it's the same as CLIL. CLIL,
Right.
sorry.
Yeah, you're talking about CLIL. Yes, but no. The thing with CLIL at the end is that CLIL stands for Content and Language Integrated Learning. And when you teach CLIL, it means that you're gonna be teaching content and language at the same time and with the same emphasis. And then your objective, it's not only English teaching, but it's also content teaching, which means at the end, for example, of the unit, when you evaluate your students, you're not only going to evaluate their language attainment, but also their content attainment. That is clear. You teach and evaluate both the language and the content at the same time. In this case, what we are concentrating on is language practice. We're teaching English, but we're teaching English through STEAM content. But we're not going to evaluate students' knowledge about archaeology, for example, but rather we're going to evaluate their abilities for presenting information in English, researching, reading, listening, understanding in English, and their abilities to deal with that information altogether. The difference between what I'm suggesting, the integration of STEAM and ELT versus CLIL, is on how you evaluate it, how you teach it and evaluate it. In CLIL, you evaluate language and content alongside and with the same emphasis. In this integration of ELT plus STEAM content, what you are concentrated on is English, but you teach English through, or you practice English further through the STEAM content. Okay? Thank you.
Oh, awesome. And the one last question, let me find it here. Erika Maria Rocha Leite is asking who created the STEAM project.
I'm not sure I'm understanding. The whole concept of STEAM, which is, again, science, technology, engineering, arts, and math, was originally created as part of a need in the U.S. Department of Education to incorporate those topics into their regular teaching. So originally, it was a methodology that was created in the US, but it's now widely used all over the planet. So if you're asking who created STEAM as a concept, as an educational methodology, then it is the US Department of Education. That was the origin of it. If you're asking about the project that I presented to you, then this integration of ELT and STEAM was created by us at National Geographic Learning. but I think you were referring to the whole concept of STEAM, and that comes straight from the U.S. Department of Education. Okay.
Oh, thanks a lot, Jade. It was really amazing. And well, there's no more questions right now. And that's it. Thanks a lot for your participation in our event.
Thank you very much, and I hope to hear from you in my social media. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Take care. Stay safe.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.